Alright guys, so I thought I'd just hop on and make a video because there's been a little bit of negativity recently, last couple of days in the PSVR 2 sort of community, because Beat Saber is getting discontinued by Meta on PSVR 2, and that was kind of inevitable, I guess. When Meta first bought the studio Beat Games that makes Beat Saber, a lot of us kind of speculated that it'd be discontinued on PSVR 2. It seems like that would be the obvious thing that would happen. It didn't happen straight away. You know, they continued supporting it for a number of months, but now we've had this announcement that they are going to stop doing updates, and multiplayer won't be working on PSVR 2 as of, is it January next year? Yeah, inevitable. Meta, with their infinite money, went around buying up loads of VR studios, trying to sort of strong arm their way to VR dominance. You know, they've just thrown countless billions at VR in the hope that they'll be able to make it profitable eventually. You know, they've made a huge loss so far on the development and on the front end and on trying to grow it and on the advertising, the marketing. You know, they've thrown, I think, what are the stats we saw recently? Something like 40 billion into VR, and certainly have not recouped profit yet on that overall, because VR is a really hard market to crack. It's a really hard market to profit in. You know, the install base is just not large enough for, let's say, more high fidelity, sort of closer to AAA games to profit. You know, the budgets of these games too high to really make a profit, and we've seen companies like who made as Activision, who made Assassin's Creed Nexus, that they came out and said, you know, sales were disappointing, didn't match predictions. So, you know, we've seen companies complain about lack of profitability on Quest as well, the market leader. So on PlayStation VR 2, where, you know, you obviously need a fairly expensive console as well to run the thing, it's going to be even harder to make a profit in this unfamiliar, strange, awkward technology that most people just aren't bothered about. You know, they're not interested because it seems awkward and complicated, and there's motion sickness and there's all these other things you have to contend with, being isolated in the room. It just does not appeal to most people. From the outside. You know, of course, once you get someone in a headset, that's when you can convert people, when they actually feel what the experience of VR is like. Then you might get some converts, but yeah, just from a pure sort of marketing perspective, just sort of enticing people in, it's not an easy sell. You can't sell the amazingness of VR in videos on YouTube, showing someone a 2D flat, you know, video. Or you can't sell VR like that. You need to get them in the headset. So it's got this naturally slow curve to the growth of the market overall, which has seen studios struggle. And of course, not just on PSVR 2, it's the entire VR industry. You know, who knows how many copies Batman would have sold if it wasn't being given away free with Quest 3s. I don't think it'd have been a huge number. Although that game, by all accounts, is absolutely fantastic, and one of the best things to come out of Meta's you know, rounding up of buying all these studios. That's probably the standout example so far. But yeah, I doubt that game would have made its money back if it wasn't, you know, been played by enough people, if it wasn't getting given away for free. Quest 3 sales have not matched Quest 2 sales. You know, people haven't migrated over in the numbers that Meta might have liked. So, you know, it's one of them. It's one of them. VR is just not growing quickly, very quickly. So Sony finds himself in this position where, you know, they've been 2 generations deep into VR, where all other console manufacturers haven't even touched it with a barge pole. I mean, all right, let's be realistic. Nintendo did the Labo. That was sort of a VR themed experience. So they dipped their toe in the water with Labo, but you can't really consider that as a serious entry into the VR market. You know, it's more of a sort of curious little distraction. But yeah, so my VR cup is half full. I am just really grateful for what we've had, and in analysing the sort of state of the industry, I have to take into account all these economic factors. You know, it's not the creative people within companies that make the decisions. You know, it's the accountants who make the decisions. And with Sony currently as well being probably in a little bit of a precarious position because of their focus on games as a service that obviously has failed for several games. We don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars they have wasted over the last few years with this focus on games as a service that you know, the vast majority of which have collapsed and aren't even going to come out. That was a huge strategic error. So Sony is probably now in a situation where they're having to sort of tighten the belts and focus on things that are more guaranteed to make a profit. So that's probably part of the reason why we haven't seen as much investment into software for PSVR 2 from Sony themselves. But you know, even given that dire situation, Sony has actually put in a huge amount of money into games. Its strategy after launch has been mainly to support third-party studios adding VR modes. So of course Sony paid Capcom millions to add VR modes to Resident Evil games. There's no doubt at all that they gave IO Interactive millions to create VR modes for Hitman. You know, I would say it's probably a good chance that every game featured on a State of Play has had some money, Sony money in it. So now you're talking, of course, Thief that is coming. Obviously Synapse. You know, there's a lot of games. You can go down the list, but they have actually put money into a lot of games for the platform. It's just that, yeah, we haven't seen a huge number of like Sony IPs yet. But it's still only 2 and a bit years. You have to remember, people look back at the PSVR 1 catalogue and compare the PSVR 1 catalogue to what we've got now, and they say, oh, you know, there was so many more Sony first-party games on PSVR 1. Yeah, eventually, by the end of the life cycle of the PSVR 1, we had a good number. But in the first 2 years, there wasn't. Astrobot came out 2 years after the PSVR 1 launched. Okay, so that was 2 years in. So if we was having this conversation about PSVR 1 around the same time in its life cycle, we wouldn't be able to point to a lot of those games that came later. You know, like Persistence or Blood and Truth. They weren't there till later on. So I'm not worried from the point of view of where's all the Sony first party IPs. You know, I think there's a good chance we'll still see some. And you know, even if we don't see dedicated Sony first party VR games, we might see some more hybrids, which seems to be the more sort of affordable route to getting these high quality games into VR, and it's something that Sony is in a unique position to be able to do. You know, of course Meta can't do this, they can't do hybrids. Any VR sort of standout titles they've got really has to be VR specific. You know, VR only games, which are much more expensive to make in terms of profitability and the money it takes to develop them. So, you know, I just think we have to take into account all these other economic factors and be realistic about where we're at currently with this industry. Because, you know, what we want doesn't always equate to what is possible. And especially when you take into account the economics of the situation. So my VR glass is half full. I'm so grateful for what we've had so far. I'm so grateful that Sony has stayed in VR for 2 generations and innovated with the technology as well, because, you know, let's not forget the significance of that. They pushed the bar, they moved the bar for VR immersion. You know, they were ahead of the game with eye tracking. You know, they are the only headset to have head haptics, which really increases immersion. It's a lovely, unique experience. Having the headset vibration on PSVR 2 really helps in certain games. You know, with their decisions around using an OLED panel HDR, I really appreciate the fact that they went with that screen, because those true blacks and that high contrast, those beautiful colours, really helps with immersion, really helps make game worlds pop and feel more tangible. And I'm so glad that we have that instead of sort of the greys of an LCD screen. So, you know, I think, you know, it's really about perspective. You can really choose whether to focus on the negative things or choose whether to focus on the positive things. You know, I could sit here and list off half a dozen games that didn't come to PSVR 2, but I could also list off a dozen games that did come to PSVR 2, you know, many of which are exclusive, or at least it's PC and PlayStation only, and didn't come to standalone. So, you know, you can make different lists depending on what your focus wants to be, how you look at things. And unfortunately, I do think at least some part of the problem here is optics. So when you've got, you know, a bunch of content creators on YouTube making negative sounding videos going, oh god, it's the end, oh sorry, the PlayStation's going to be dead within a year, blah blah blah, then that is going to put off potential players. If you're interested in PSVR 2, you go on YouTube and you type in PSVR 2 and you see a bunch of videos of people going, oh, this game didn't come out, that game didn't come out, oh, blah blah blah, you know, all these talking points for you. That might put people off. The optics of it. It's not that, and that's not, you know, that's not because the experience is lacking. That's not because you can't have, you know, dozens of amazing games to play on PSVR 2. It's because you've urged someone with a negative take. So unfortunately, I think that is part of the issue. I'm not saying, you know, I'm not saying people don't have a right to frame things in that way, but I just think those negative takes are usually couched in, or coming from the perspective of what we want. So, you know, because what has happened hasn't necessarily matched up to what we'd like to happen, then some people think that is a negative. But actually, I think it's more healthy and more realistic to judge things by what is possible, given various circumstances. Yeah, the main one being economic, the main one being size of the VR market, profitability, and all this stuff. So, you know, that's really the crux of why things are as they are. But Sony must have been encouraged recently, so they hopefully will have, you know, been given the message that there is demand there for PSVR 2, because we saw a huge uptick in adoption of PSVR 2 when the sales went on. Obviously, $550 quid, whatever, is a huge investment for people, especially if you're unsure about this technology. You don't know if you're even going to get on with it, if you're going to be even able to play it, because you hear stories about motion sickness and all this. So it's this unfamiliar technology, you're taking a risk on it. So the high price point is absolutely a barrier to people just taking a risk. So, but they addressed that. They took $150 off it in a huge price drop recently, and that did see a massive uptick in adoption. So hopefully Sony's had the message there that there is demand. It's just that people are hesitant, and one of the reasons is because of price, understandably so. So, you know, how do you solve that problem? Well, they sell the headset at a loss and hope to make it back on software sales, of course, which is the same situation for consoles in recent years as well. So maybe that will happen. They did do a further reduction in the sale recently, so you could get it very cheap recently. But yeah, that's really why things are as they are. And given those economic circumstances, I think it's amazing that we've got as much as we have done. So I find it really hard to be negative or sort of lament the things we didn't get, because what we did get has been absolutely amazing. Like, it's the only place you can get top tier AAA quality VR games outside of mods, outside of the PC mod community, where of course you've got to spend about $3,000 to get a PC that's capable enough and a headset that's good enough, and then all the other stuff you need to learn, you know, about getting these things to work and all the rest of it. It's a ball ache that most people, you know, just aren't up for. So I can't be negative. I can't feel negative about it when we've got so much, and by rights, you know, it's not an industry where you can expect huge growth. So I think we're doing all right. I think Sony's keeping it ticking over nicely, and they've expanded the appeal and reach of this headset recently, of course, opening it up to PC. And you know, they've done this deal with Apple, so the controllers are going to be usable with the Apple headset. Now, again, this is about perspective. So you can take a news story and you can spin it one way or the other depending on what you say about it. All right. So with for example, people are saying, oh, Sony might be discontinuing PSVR 2 within a year. Well, they've just made the decision to open up the sale of the controllers to the Apple headset. So they've made a deal with Apple to support their headset with their controllers. So if Sony was planning to wind down production and support for PSVR 2, does it make sense that they would have literally just made a deal to start selling the controllers on a different headset? That doesn't make sense to me. That tells me that they're committed, that they're in this for the long haul, that they are projecting forward in how they can widen the appeal and scope of this headset. So it might just be that it's on a slow burn, and that's fine with me, because yeah, we are inundated with games. My backlog is huge. I really don't need like 2-3 times as many games coming out for this headset. I really don't. I would not be able to keep up, and that would make me sad, because I do want to get to all these games eventually that I've sort of half played or done a couple hours here and there. But you know, life's busy for most people, man. I mean, I don't know how many hours you lot are playing VR, but I'm not playing it as much as I'd like to. So the backlog is real. But yeah, to me, I think they've made decisions recently that show that they're committed and looking long term for this headset, and it could have long legs. It could last all the way to PS6, because of course this headset is in the advantageous position of running off the hardware of a console, not restricted to, you know, underpowered standalone headsets, which has to be updated every couple of years, you know, so the games can get to look better. Yeah, I think it's about perspective, guys. I think we're eating good on PSVR 2, and I don't think it's kind of, you know, makes sense to say, oh, we're not seeing Sony first party games come out since launch. That means it's all over.